You've made it through another day. Well done. Take a slow, deep breath and let your body relax completely. Close your eyes and simply listen to my voice. It's okay if you can't sleep. Just rest here with me. Tonight, I'll tell you the story of Tokugawa Ieyasu, the man who waited longer than anyone thought possible and built a peace that lasted 260 years. A man who lost everything as a child and never stopped learning from it. A man who watched and waited and endured until the moment arrived that only he could seize. If you find yourself drifting off while listening, feel free to leave a comment that says, "I made it this far." Right now, somewhere in the world, someone else is listening to this same story, in the same stillness. You are not alone. May you fall asleep tonight knowing that someone is sharing this quiet night with you. If this time has brought you even a little peace, a subscription would mean the world, only if it truly feels right to you. In the year 1543, in a small castle in the province of Mikawa, a boy was born. His name was Takuchiyo. The castle was called Okazaki. It sat on a low rise above the Yahagi River, a modest fortress for a modest lord, in a land known less for its beauty than for the stubbornness of its people. The men of Mikawa were said to be the toughest in Japan, not the most brilliant, not the most refined, but the kind of men who once they had decided something could not be moved. They called it Mikawa Kishitsu, the Mikawa spirit, a quality of absolute unyielding endurance. Into this land and this spirit, Takuchiyo was born. He would carry the Mikawa spirit his entire life. He would outlast everyone. He would wait when others could not wait. He would endure when endurance seemed impossible. Takuchiyo's father was a minor lord with a difficult problem. He was caught between two far more powerful neighbors, the Oda clan to the west and the Imagawa clan to the east. To survive, he needed alliances. And alliances in the brutal diplomacy of 16th century Japan were sealed with hostages. When Takuchiyo was 6 years old, he was sent east as a hostage to the Imagawa clan. He was put on a boat. He was carried away from his mother, his castle, his home. He was 6 years old. On the way east, he was intercepted, captured by agents of the Oda clan, and brought to their lord. And so the boy who had been sent to be a hostage of the Imagawa became instead a hostage of the Oda. He was 6 years old, alone, in a stranger's castle, in a stranger's land. He had no way of knowing that this displacement, this terrifying uprooting, would become the foundation of everything he would later build. The years of captivity were not cruel. Nobuhide Oda, and later his son Nobunaga, did not mistreat the boy. He was given a room, an education, a measure of dignity, but he was not free. He grew up watching how power worked, watching how lords spoke to each other, the hidden currents beneath the formal words, watching how alliances were built and how they broke, watching how men with less patience than cleverness destroyed themselves in a single reckless moment. He learned to be very, very patient. He learned to wait. Not passively, not the waiting of a man who has given up, but the waiting of a man who is always thinking, always preparing, always reading the room with the quiet attention of someone who has understood, since childhood, that the moment will come, and that when it comes he must be ready. Patience was not Ieyasu's weakness. When he was around 13, the political winds shifted. He was transferred to the Imagawa clan, the original destination of his childhood journey. He spent several years there, in the large and cultured court of Imagawa Yoshimoto. Yoshimoto was a man of genuine sophistication. He loved poetry and the tea ceremony. He dressed elegantly and spoke with precision. He controlled much of the land east of Oda territory and had ambitions that reached all the way to Kyoto. Ieyasu, now renamed Motoyasu, served in Yoshimoto's household. He married. He had children. He learned the arts of war and governance under a capable master. But all the while, he watched. He saw that Yoshimoto's confidence was not quite matched by his caution. that the brilliance of the man's court was also its vulnerability, a certain softness at the center, a belief that elegance and power were the same thing. He filed this observation away. In the summer of 1560, Imagawa Yoshimoto made his move. He assembled a vast army, 25,000 men, and marched west toward the capital. He was going to take Kyoto. He was going to make himself the most powerful lord in Japan. He was confident. He had every reason to be. He camped his army in a narrow gorge called Okehazama to shelter from a summer storm, and Oda Nobunaga, with a force less than a tenth the size, attacked. In the chaos of thunder and driving rain, Nobunaga's men found Yoshimoto's headquarters. Imagawa Yoshimoto, the cultured, powerful, unstoppable lord of the East, was killed. In an instant, the great edifice of Imagawa power collapsed, and Motoyasu, the young hostage lord of Mikawa, was suddenly, unexpectedly free. He rode back to Okazaki, back to the castle where he had been born, back to the land and the people that had never quite stopped being his, even across the years of his absence. The men of Mikawa came to him. They had waited for their lord, and now, for the first time in his life, Ieyasu stood on his own land, under his own sky, as his own man. He was 17 years old. Within 2 years, he had formed an alliance with the man who had, in a roundabout way, freed him, Oda Nobunaga. The alliance between Oda Nobunaga and Tokugawa Ieyasu would last until Nobunaga's death. It was one of the most consequential partnerships in Japanese history. Two men who understood each other, who saw in each other's strengths something they could not provide themselves. The years that followed were years of war. Ieyasu fought alongside Nobunaga. He fought against the Western clans. He expanded his territory in the east. And he suffered. In the winter of 1573, he faced the great Takeda Shingen, the Tiger of Kai, perhaps the most feared military commander in Japan. At a place called Sekigahara, Shingen's forces destroyed Ieyasu's army, so thoroughly that Ieyasu fled the battlefield alone on horseback, barely escaping with his life. He returned to his castle in a state of shock. There is a famous story, perhaps legend, that afterward, Ieyasu had a portrait painted of himself at that moment, slumped on his horse, defeated, terrified. He kept the portrait as a reminder. Never again let your guard down. Never again underestimate your enemy. Never forget what defeat feels like. He was 29 years old, and he had just learned the most important lesson of his military career. Takeda Shingen died the following year. His death, from illness during a campaign, removed the most dangerous single obstacle in Ieyasu's path. History does not always give us dramatic turning points. Sometimes the door simply opens, not because someone forced it, but because time moved forward and the obstacle was no longer there. Ieyasu received the news quietly. He did not celebrate. He understood, by now, that the landscape of power was always shifting, that today's relief was tomorrow's new challenge. He expanded eastward, into territory that Takeda had controlled. He strengthened his castles. He trained his men. He continued to build, slowly, steadily, the way a river carves a canyon, not through force, but through persistence. The darkest chapter of Ieyasu's personal life came in 1579. His wife, Lady Tsukiyama, was discovered to have been in contact with the Takeda clan, the enemy. His eldest son, Nobuyasu, was suspected of involvement. Nobunaga demanded that Ieyasu act. What Nobunaga was asking was unthinkable. He was asking a man to order the execution of his own wife and son, to choose alliance over family, to choose survival over love. Ieyasu obeyed. His wife was executed. His son was ordered to commit ritual suicide. We cannot know what happened inside Ieyasu in the days that followed. The historical record is silent on this. But the man who emerged from that silence was different, more contained, more careful, as if something had been locked away, deep inside that would never be opened again. After Nobunaga's death at Honnoji in 1582, Ieyasu found himself at a crossroads. He had been visiting the Kinai region when the news arrived, far from his own territory, with only a small escort, surrounded by potential enemies. Getting home was itself a life-or-death problem. He moved quickly, quietly, through the mountain passes of Iga province, aided by local guides who knew the hidden paths. He made it back to Mikawa, and then he watched. He watched as Hideyoshi moved with extraordinary speed to avenge Nobunaga and seize the succession. He watched as the other generals scrambled and competed. He did not rush. He was not yet strong enough to win a direct confrontation with Hideyoshi. He knew this. So he built. He waited. In 1584, Ieyasu and Hideyoshi came to the edge of open war. Their forces met near Komaki and Nagakute in a series of engagements that lasted several months. Ieyasu won the military encounters. He outmaneuvered Hideyoshi's generals with a tactical precision that impressed even his enemies. But he knew that military victory alone was not enough. Hideyoshi could replace armies. He could not replace the political momentum that was gathering around the man who had avenged Nobunaga. And so Ieyasu accepted peace. He sent his own mother as a hostage. He arranged a diplomatic marriage. He bowed his head, just enough, to the man he knew he would outlive. It was not defeat. It was strategy. Hideyoshi had won the moment. Ieyasu was playing for the era. The years under Hideyoshi's dominance were not easy years. Ieyasu was reassigned, moved from his ancestral lands in Mikawa to the Kanto Plain in the east, far from the centers of power. It was meant as a marginalizing move, an assignment to the frontier, away from the important decisions. Ieyasu accepted it. He went east. He looked at the vast, marshy, underpopulated plain and saw something no one else saw. He chose a small fishing village on the edge of a bay as his new headquarters. The village was called Edo. He began to build. He drained the marshes. He invited settlers. He constructed roads and irrigation systems and a castle that grew year by year into something formidable. While everyone else was watching the west, Ieyasu was quietly building the future. The fishing village of Edo would one day be the largest city in the world. We know it now as Tokyo. When Hideyoshi died in 1598, Ieyasu was 55 years old. He had been patient for decades. He had watched Nobunaga rise and fall. He had watched Hideyoshi rise and now fall. He was the last great figure of his generation still standing. The promises made at Hideyoshi's deathbed began to dissolve almost immediately. The Council of Five Regents, of which Ieyasu was one, was supposed to govern together until Hideyoshi's young son, Hideyori, came of age. Ieyasu began to make political marriages. He negotiated alliances. He positioned his allies in key positions. The other regents protested. He was violating the agreements. He was breaking his oath to the dying Hideyoshi. Ieyasu acknowledged this quietly. The man who emerged as Ieyasu's greatest opponent was Ishida Mitsunari. He had been one of Hideyoshi's most brilliant administrators, a man of extraordinary organizational talent and fierce personal loyalty to the Toyotomi cause. He was not a soldier by nature. He was a bureaucrat, a planner, a man who saw the world in terms of systems and order. But he despised what Ieyasu was doing. He saw the slow, deliberate dismantling of everything Hideyoshi had built. He understood that Ieyasu was not simply positioning himself. He was preparing to take everything. Mitsunari began to build a coalition. He reached out to the Western lords. He made promises and arguments and appeals to loyalty and honor. He was brilliant, organized, and completely right about what Ieyasu intended. He was also, as it would turn out, not quite equal to the task before him. Through the summer of 1600, Japan divided. Two great factions coalesced: the Eastern Army under Tokugawa Ieyasu, and the Western Army under Ishida Mitsunari in the nominal banner of the Toyotomi legacy. Lords across Japan had to choose. It was not a simple choice. Some chose based on loyalty. Some chose based on geography. Some chose based on careful calculation of which side was likely to win. And some, the most dangerous ones, made promises to both sides and waited to see which way the wind would blow. Ieyasu began his march west in the late summer. He moved with his characteristic deliberateness, not rushing, not exposing himself unnecessarily, gathering his forces with the patience of a man who had been preparing for this moment his entire life. The Western forces moved to meet him. The stage was set. The plain of Sekigahara. It lies in what is now Gifu Prefecture, a wide valley ringed by wooded hills through which the main road connecting East and West Japan has always passed. Whoever controlled Sekigahara controlled the country. By the evening of October 20th, 1600, the two armies had taken their positions. The Western forces, approximately 80,000 men, held the high ground on the hills surrounding the plain. The Eastern forces, approximately 75,000 men, were massed on the flat ground below. On paper, the Western position looked stronger. The high ground was advantageous. The numbers were slightly greater. Mitsunari, looking out from his command position, had reason for cautious confidence. But Ieyasu, on the plain below, knew something Mitsunari did not fully know. Several of the Western commanders had already been speaking to him. The night before the battle was cold and wet. Fog came in from the hills and settled over the plain, muffling the sound of tens of thousands of men trying to sleep on the cold ground. Neither army could see the other clearly. In the darkness, men lay wrapped in whatever they had and thought about their families, about the warmth of their homes, about all the things that might be lost tomorrow. This is the part of history that the battle accounts never quite capture. The silence before, the ordinary humanity of the men waiting. Farmers drafted into armies, merchants' sons carrying weapons they had never imagined holding, samurai trained from childhood who still, in the dark hours before dawn, felt the weight of what was coming. Ieyasu is said to have slept. Whether this was genuine calm or a performance of calm, we cannot say. But his men saw it. Dawn came slowly through the fog on October 21st, 1600. For a time, neither side could see the other. The armies waited. And then as the morning light strengthened and the fog began to lift from the lower ground, the battle began. The initial clashes were fierce and inconclusive. Ieyasu's eastern forces pushed against the western lines. The western forces held their positions in the hills. The battle could have gone either way. On the eastern slopes of Mount Matsuo, a western commander named Kobayakawa Hideaki had positioned his force of approximately 15,000 men. He was young, only 19 years old. He had been promised things by both sides. He had been waiting to see which way the wind blew. Mitsunari expected him to attack the eastern forces from the flank. This was the plan. This was what the Western strategy depended on. Kobayakawa did not move. Ieyasu watched from below. And then Ieyasu did something audacious. He ordered his own guns to fire on Kobayakawa's position. Not to kill, to force a decision. The message was unmistakable. Choose now. There is no more time to wait. Kobayakawa Hideaki chose. He turned his army against the Western forces. 15,000 men, who had been positioned to support Mitsunari, now fell upon the western flank from above. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Other Western commanders who had been watching, who had made their own quiet arrangements with Ieyasu, saw Kobayakawa move and join the betrayal. The Western Army, which had held its lines through hours of hard fighting, suddenly found itself attacked from multiple directions at once. The lines fractured, then they broke. Men who had been fighting with discipline and courage moments before were now running, down the hillsides, through the valley, into the surrounding forests, pursued by Eastern forces who had waited 6 hours for exactly this moment. The Battle of Sekigahara lasted approximately 6 hours. In those 6 hours, the fate of Japan was decided. Ishida Mitsunari fled. He ran with a small group of followers into the mountains north of Sekigahara. He hid for several days, moving at night, sheltering in the homes of local farmers who either did not recognize him or were too afraid to turn him in. He was eventually found, captured by local peasants, exhausted and sick, hiding in a mountain hut. He was brought to Kyoto. When he was led through the city, people came out to watch. Some threw vegetables at him, others were silent. He refused to eat a persimmon offered by a guard, saying that it would upset his stomach. A guard laughed. What did it matter, given that he was about to be executed? Mitsunari replied that a man of resolve always looked after his health, no matter the circumstances. On the 1st of November, he was executed on the dry riverbed of the Kamo River. He was 40 years old, a brilliant man who had chosen the losing side and paid with everything. The aftermath of Sekigahara was swift and thorough. The Western lords who had fought against Ieyasu were stripped of their territories. Some were executed. Some were reduced to small, distant domains where they could cause no more trouble. The Eastern lords who had fought for Ieyasu were rewarded. New territories, better positions, access to the centers of power, and the lords who had betrayed the Western cause at the critical moment, Kobayakawa and the others, received their promised rewards. But Kobayakawa Hideaki did not enjoy his reward for long. Within 2 years, he was dead. He died young, perhaps from illness, perhaps, as some accounts suggest, from the weight of what he had done. History does not always let the opportunist celebrate. In 1603, the emperor appointed Tokugawa Ieyasu to the office of Seitai Shogun, the supreme military commander of Japan. It was a title that had not been held by anyone outside the Minamoto bloodline for centuries. Ieyasu had arranged his genealogy carefully. He had traced, or constructed, a lineage connecting him to the ancient Minamoto clan. The emperor accepted the connection. The title was granted. Ieyasu stood in the imperial presence and received the seal of the shogunate. He was 60 years old. He had waited 6 decades for this moment, and he had not waited passively. Every year of those 6 decades had been preparation. Every alliance, every endurance, every strategic retreat, every quiet act of building, while others fought for the short-term prize. All of it had been accumulating, year by year, toward this moment. But Ieyasu understood something crucial. The Toyotomi heir, young Hideyori, was still alive, still in Osaka Castle, still the symbolic center around which opposition to the Tokugawa could gather. To secure the succession, Ieyasu did something deliberate and public. Just 2 years after being appointed shogun, he resigned the title, passing it to his son Hidetada. The message was clear and unmistakable. The shogunate belongs to the Tokugawa family, not to one man, to the lineage. Anyone hoping to wait out Ieyasu's life and then challenge the succession had just been informed that the plan would not work. It was a masterstroke of institutional design. He had built not just a moment of power, but a system of power, a system designed to outlast any single person, including himself. The great castle of Edo rose year by year. What had once been a modest fishing village on a marshy bay was becoming something extraordinary. Ieyasu poured resources into the city, building roads, canals, markets, and the vast fortifications of the castle complex that would eventually become the largest castle grounds in the world. He invited craftsmen, merchants, scholars. He organized the city with the same patient deliberateness he applied to everything. Edo grew, and as it grew, it began to take on a life of its own, a new center of gravity for Japan, pulling people and trade and energy toward the east. The old capital, Kyoto, remained the seat of the emperor and the ancient culture, but the real power was now in Edo. Quietly, irreversibly, the center of Japanese life was shifting. Still, Osaka Castle stood, and within it, Hideyoshi's son, now a young man, lived with his mother and the remnants of the Toyotomi supporters. For years, an uneasy peace held. Ieyasu was too smart to attack without cause. The Toyotomi were too weakened to act without allies. The crisis came over a temple bell. Ieyasu declared that an inscription on a newly cast bell at Hokoji Temple was an insult to the Tokugawa, that the characters used contained a hidden curse upon his name. Whether this was genuine outrage or a manufactured pretext, only Ieyasu knew. He issued demands. The Toyotomi refused. The siege of Osaka began in the winter of 1614. The winter siege of Osaka lasted several months. Osaka Castle was virtually impregnable. Its massive stone walls, wide moats, and enormous stores of provisions made a direct assault suicidal. Ieyasu chose a different approach. His forces bombarded the castle, not to breach the walls, but to unsettle the defenders. The noise was enormous. The psychological pressure was relentless. Eventually, peace negotiations began. Ieyasu agreed to terms, and then, almost immediately after the agreement was signed, his forces began filling in the outer moat. The defenders protested. Ieyasu's representative said it was a misunderstanding. By the time the misunderstanding was clarified, the moat was gone. Osaka Castle, stripped of its outer defenses, stood exposed. The summer siege came in 1615. This time, the battle was fought in the open fields south of the castle. The Toyotomi forces fought with remarkable bravery. Several of their commanders, men who had nothing left to lose, performed extraordinary feats that would be remembered and celebrated for centuries. But bravery, against overwhelming numbers and superior organization, is not enough. The Toyotomi forces were defeated in the field. The castle was breached. Fire spread through the compound. Hideyoshi's son, the child for whom Hideyoshi had begged and pleaded on his deathbed, died in the flames. His mother also died. The Toyotomi line was finished. Ieyasu, 72 years old, stood in the firelight and watched Hideyoshi's dream burn away. The following year, 1616, Tokugawa Ieyasu died. He had been ill for some time, likely from stomach cancer, though the historical record is uncertain. He died at Sunpu Castle, in the province he had retreated to after formally resigning the shogunate to his son. He was 74 years old. Before he died, he left instructions. He was to be buried simply, at first, at Kunozan overlooking the sea. Later, his remains were to be moved to Nikko, in the mountains north of Edo. He was to be deified, enshrined as a god, given the posthumous name Tosho Daigongen, the great avatar illuminating the east. Even in death, he was thinking about institutional design, about the story that would be told, about the permanence of what he was building. Nikko. The shrine that was built in his honor is one of the most extraordinary places in Japan. Set in a cedar forest in the mountains of Tochigi Prefecture, it is almost overwhelming in its intricacy and beauty. Gold and lacquer and carved wood. Thousands of craftsmen worked for 2 years to build it. People come from all over the world to stand in its courtyards and feel something they struggle to name. The weight of time, perhaps. The strange beauty of a civilization that had enough peace and security to build something like this. Ieyasu had made this possible. Not just the shrine, the peace that surrounded it. The 260 years of relative stability during which Japanese culture flowered in ways that are still with us. What did those 260 years look like? After the fall of Osaka, Japan closed itself off from most of the outside world. The Tokugawa shogunate implemented a policy called sakoku, national isolation. Trade was restricted. Foreign contact was limited to a small number of carefully controlled ports. Within these controlled borders, Japan did something remarkable. It built theater, poetry, ceramics, textile arts, cuisine, philosophy. The practice of everyday life elevated to extraordinary refinement. Without the constant disruption of civil war, Japanese culture developed a depth and density that continues to shape the country today. Every time you see a woodblock print, every time you eat sushi with its perfect balance of flavors, every time you encounter the philosophy of wabi, the beauty of imperfection, you are touching something that grew in those 260 years of Tokugawa peace. Ieyasu was not a simple man, and this is not a simple story. The peace he built came at a cost. The rigid social hierarchies of the Edo period trapped people in inherited roles. Merchants who grew wealthy had no political power. Farmers who worked the land had few rights. Women's lives were severely constrained. The isolation that preserved the culture also eventually left Japan vulnerable. When Western ships arrived with superior technology in the 19th century, Japan found itself dangerously behind. The Tokugawa peace ended in 1868, when the shogunate was overthrown and the emperor restored to power. This is history's way. Every great structure eventually gives way to the next. But what was built in those 260 years did not disappear. It transformed. It became the foundation of modern Japan. What was the secret of Ieyasu's patience? How does a man wait and wait and wait, through defeat, through loss, through decades of watching others hold the power he wanted and not break? There is a famous saying attributed to Ieyasu. Life is like unto a long journey with a heavy burden. Let thy step be slow and steady, that thou stumble not. Whether he actually said these words, we cannot be certain, but they capture something true about the way he moved through the world. He did not rush. He did not reach for things before he was ready to hold them. He did not let anger or pride push him into actions that felt satisfying in the moment, but destroyed his position in the long run. He stumbled, of course. Everyone stumbles, but he stumbled slowly, and he recovered. There is another famous saying comparing the three great unifiers of Japan. It goes like this: if a nightingale will not sing, what do? Nobunaga, kill it. Hideyoshi, make it want to sing. Ieyasu, wait until it sings. It is a neat formulation, perhaps too neat. These were complex human beings, not metaphors, but there is something in it that rings true. Nobunaga forced the world into the shape he wanted. Hideyoshi charmed and persuaded the world into a new shape. Ieyasu let the world move at its own pace and positioned himself to be there when it arrived. 3 different relationships with time. 3 different relationships with power. All 3 necessary. All 3 in their way extraordinary. The nightingale sings now. Or rather, it is quiet now. Everything is quiet. Your body is heavier than it was when we began. Your breathing is slower. The thoughts that seemed so urgent have softened into something less insistent. This is the natural direction of things. Even Ieyasu, who spent his whole life staying alert, staying ready, even he understood that rest is not weakness. He wrote to his officers during long campaigns, "Take care of your men's bodies. A rested army fights better than a tired one. Rest is preparation. Rest is the gathering of what you will need tomorrow. Let yourself rest now. The Tokugawa shoguns ruled Japan for 15 generations, from Ieyasu to Yoshinobu, who surrendered power in 1867. There were 15 men in that line, each one built on what the one before had made. Each one inherited a country that was, whatever its imperfections, at peace. 15 generations. 260 years. Think about that. The American Revolution happened within the Tokugawa period. The French Revolution, the Napoleonic Wars, the Industrial Revolution in England. While Europe was convulsed by wars and revolutions that reshaped the entire world, Japan was building theater. Japan was writing poetry. Japan was refining the art of the tea ceremony to a level of perfection it had never achieved before. Not because the Japanese people were better or more peaceful by nature, but because one man built a system of governance robust enough to outlast him by 2.5 centuries. The plain of Sekigahara today is quiet. The road still passes through it, now a highway instead of an earthen track. Rice paddies still stretch across the flat ground. The hills are still there, green and wooded, rising on both sides. A small museum marks the site. Plaques indicate where various commanders stood. Visitors come to stand on the ground where the fate of Japan was decided in 6 hours on a foggy October morning. There is not much to see, a field, some hills, the sky. But if you stand there long enough, there is something in the air. A quality of stillness, as if the place itself is still absorbing what happened here. 400 years of aftermath, settling slowly into the earth. You are still here, breathing slowly. Your eyes, if they are still open, are heavy. Let them close. There is nothing you need to do right now. Nothing you need to figure out. Nothing you need to fix or decide or plan. Like Ieyasu on the cold ground before Sekigahara, you have done today what today required. That is enough. It is more than enough. The rest can wait until morning. Morning always comes, and whatever is waiting for you there, you will face it better for having rested. The Toshogu shrine at Nikko is famous for something small. Among the thousands of intricate carvings that cover its walls and rooftops, there is one image that people seek out above all others. 3 monkeys, one covering its eyes, one covering its ears, one covering its mouth. See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Mizaru, Kikazaru, Iwazaru. It is, in its way, a very Ieyasu thing to carve into a temple wall. The wisdom of not reacting to everything, the wisdom of choosing what you take in, what you respond to, what you put into the world. In a life defined by patience, by the refusal to be provoked into premature action, it seems right that this image should be carved into the place where he is remembered. 3 monkeys, 1 lesson. Sometimes the wisest thing is to wait. The night is very still now. The cedar forests of Nikko are dark and cold. The river sounds somewhere below. The stars, where they can be seen between the branches, are very far away. And in a small castle town in Mikawa province, in a place called Okazaki, a boy of 6 is being put into a boat. He does not know where he is going. He does not know what will be asked of him. He does not know that he will spend the next 68 years learning, enduring, watching, and waiting until the world finally arrives at the shape he has spent his whole life preparing for. He only knows the sound of the water, the cold air, the boat moving away from everything familiar. And somewhere in him, in whatever the deepest part of a 6-year-old is, something holds steady, something that will not break, something that will wait as long as it needs to wait. Sleep now, you have traveled far enough for one day. Let the water carry you. Let the quiet of the cedar forest surround you. Let the long patience of the night do its work. Tomorrow you will stand again. Tomorrow you will carry again. But not yet.